Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. And another twist in the Eben Etzebeth controversial sort of ban, the star himself has spoken, and the Springbok Lock has officially just taken to Instagram to provide his side of the story, and a pretty lengthy post accompanied by 3 videos of the incident itself, which has seen him being banned for 12 weeks and will not feature for the Sharks until April due to the ban for the eye gouge on Alex Mann. And we hadn't heard anything about from him, really hadn't had an official statement or anything like that. What we did know is that he was back with the Sharks, for example, and was going to supposedly be coaching for the next few months. And all of a sudden, we do have a some sort of statement. We do have an account from the player itself, and he has basically posted on Instagram to basically, to explain himself and explain his actions, not to justify his actions, not to say that he's not guilty, which he says very specifically in the post, but to provide better context. So I thought we'd actually look at the post itself and sort of see what he's got to say. Right, so this is the post that came out about 5 or 6 minutes ago. I think 13 minutes ago officially. It says that the following. He says, "I've been quiet, but now that my hearing is done, I think I owe everyone an explanation. First of all, this post is not to show, it's to show that I was not guilty. So it's not a post to try and say that he was wrongly sanctioned, the likes of that. He says, I accept guilt. I made a mistake and I'm willing to serve a suspension, which I deserve." Very clever to start with that, by the way, because that basically means that there's not going to be any further sanctions, for example. He's not coming out and slamming the process or slamming World Rugby, the likes of that. He said that the suspension is fair, for example, that he deserves it, he's willing to serve it, and he made a mistake, etc., etc. However, he says, I don't want young kids who look up to the Springboks to think that it's okay to eye gouge someone, because it's not. But unfortunately, mistakes happen, and I made a big one for which I'm sorry. So there again, accepting the guilt, accepting that there was an eye gouge involved, and that it's never going to be okay, and that this is something that needs to be very much advocated against at all levels, and never ever used as something that is justifiable. He then said, though, but I'd like to answer the question, why did you do such a thing? So why did you make such a mistake? I'm going to look at it over here. He said, it was a mistake caused by my reaction and other factors that played a role. Then he has a basic explanation for all the different posts that he has made. He's got 3 different slides, and he kind of goes through exactly what each sort of camera angle is looking at. So I thought we'd actually look at the camera angle and kind of see what he is on about. So let's go have a look, shall we? So this is slide 1, of which he says, in terms of the context, saying, the scuffle was basically over when Wales number 7 struck me with an open hand to my chin/neck area. You can see me looking at the assistant referee and waiting for a reaction from him. It happened fast, and it's understandable that he didn't see it. Once again, not going after the officials, keeping himself very much in the good books, I suppose, or in the clear over there. He said, without reacting yet, I got another pull on my jersey before I go in with a similar type of action. So let's see exactly what he's talking about over there. So over there, you can see nothing really happened. There is the strike. And you can see open fist, open hand over there against Eben Etzebeth. And there again, to be fair, he does look exactly to the assistant. So there is definitely eye contact basically saying, are you going to do anything about that? And then there's the pull. So that, I think, is what basically incites the whole thing. So there is definitely a shove. There is definitely, contact. He definitely does look at the referee, to be fair, to basically say, are you going to get involved? And then there is the pull from number 7, which you can see by this sort of angle over here. Now, this is basically saying that this is when he responds, and he then, same thing over there, puts his arm over him, and that's where we eventually end up with the eye gouge coming up. And so that is basically him sort of saying this is where the reaction started. That is where things started. The fact that there was a strike to his face, that nothing happened. He then said, right, slide 2. Before we get into slide 2, he says the following. He says, you can clearly see my first point of contact is against his shoulder with an open hand, just like he did, except he got me on the chin. Another thing worth mentioning, when he struck me, I was standing still with not a lot of movement or players trying to get involved. When I went for the same open hand towards his shoulder, you'll see 2 Welsh players changing the dynamic and the entire picture, as was one of the teammates pulling Wales number 7 around his neck away from my hand and where my force is going. So this is basically over here. So you can see once again, there's not much going on. He comes in, Alex Mann comes in over here. and there's the shove. Eben Etzebeth has a check at the assistant referee, nothing. Then there's a pull, and then all of a sudden, there you can see his arm comes through. Apologies, Instagram's not the most web friendly, and you can see there that's the initial shove, and then he's got his hands all over him basically, and that's over there. Then obviously as it comes around, that's when we sort of see the eye guards. Then the third slide is as follows over here. He says another camera angle of the incident, and you can kind of get to sort of see exactly what's happening there. So there's the shove, for example, and that's where something starts to get involved. Now, he's basically saying there are other factors involved in it, in that he sort of slid up, and that's kind of why he ended up in that situation. So then he goes back and says, so why did I post this? And he says, to try and show people how everything happened and that it was never intentional. I would never do something like this on purpose. I know the consequences will be after playing rugby for a few years. And thanks to everyone that stood by me and thought the best of me. I'm sorry for letting you in the game down. That was my first red card since I started playing. I wanted to be my last. To the people that were angry and upset with my actions, I understand, because it didn't look good on slow motion replay, and hopefully you've got a bit more context now. So that is sort of the reason. So basically they're not appealing the decision, for example. They've accepted the sanction. He's accepted the punishment. But this is basically to try and clear the name, where people have gone as far as saying, this is a criminal act, for example. And people have said, this is a deliberate attempt to try and blind someone, for example. And he has faced an unparamount amount of scrutiny, really, with regards to the intent that he had and the actions. And he's right, it doesn't look good in slow motion. We looked at it, for example. We said that initially, I did a video saying I couldn't find eye guards on himself, which he admitted that there wasn't. But this is basically for him to try and provide the context and say, you can see that a lot of things were happening, for example. This is how it's provoked. That is why I reacted. But he is also admitting that, his reactions were wrong and that he made the mistake. So it's important that we can't become revisionist about the situation. This is basically to say that, he didn't go flying in and finger out to try and blind a guy, for example, that there was provocation, and there was a incident that he was reacting to, and that when he retaliated, there were other external factors which maybe exaggerated the final sort of situation and got him into the point where all of a sudden we're seeing a picture with his right thumb in the eye, with his other hand on the side of the head type of thing. So you can sort of see how things can slip up and the likes of that, but it ends up in an eye gouge. There's no doubt that it ends up in an eye gouge. I think he's basically saying that it very much was not intentional. So basically he's accepting that it happened, and that was basically where the big argument for the ban is, that it was a case of reckless behavior, not intentional behavior. And this for him is to try and basically show people that, and to try and sort of more clear his name with regards to the reputational damage that's currently happening against him with some of the reaction versus the actual suspension. That's not going to change. They're not going to appeal or anything like that. So what do you think? Does this provide the context that you like? If you were upset with him, for example, does this maybe make you rethink? I think at the end of the day, we all know that he should have known better. That there was obviously a provocation. We knew that this was the case. We saw it, for example. We knew he was reacting to something. But we sort of continue to say, at player at that experience level, just every now and again, you've got to learn to be able to not get involved. Because as soon as you start getting yourself in a situation, you create a scenario where things can happen. And then there are decisions that have to be made. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.